Hi everyone, welcome back to this channel. My name is Frida Weisel, and here I explore various topics related to Judaism, New York City, and very oftentimes Hasidic Judaism, which is sort of my niche. It's where I come from. It's a subject that endlessly fascinates me. Today, I invite you for another read-along with me for a Yiddish children's book I want to share with you. I find children's books to be really interesting. They are very sociologically telling. They're a great peek into a culture. What children learn really tells you a lot about society's values and outlooks to the world. And this one is, I think, a really interesting one because we're going to look at the biblical illustrated coloring book for children, the book of Exodus, Shemas, called Kind. So let's have a look. I'll be translating on the fly and I'll be adding some commentary as we look through it. And I'm thinking what I'm going to do today is when I'm done with it, I'm going to go back and read it in Yiddish for those who are interested, because I know I'm getting a lot of comments from people who want to learn Yiddish or are interested in Hasidic Yiddish and hearing more Yiddish content. So I'm just going to do that at the end, and maybe I'll post it separately, or I'll leave it at the end. I'll decide. I am also going to be skipping some things that I think are not as interesting because it's a very long book and this is YouTube and kind of you have to think about keeping to attention spans. So I think I'm going to try to stay with the parts that I think are more interesting. And so I'm going to skim through some things that I think are less so. Here's the book, Kind Shemas. Kind Shemas, which means A Help for the Child, the book of Exodus. This book is a staple in the Hasidic community. It was a fixture in my childhood, and it was how I learned to visually imagine the stories of the Bible. And there are very many of these books that of different parts. This is for the holiday Hanukkah. This is Genesis. It's a very big book. This is the holiday of Passover. I own several of them. And the way I learned the story of the Bible was we would get pages to color of this book as children, and we would imagine what's happening in the Bible through these books. It was written, as far as I've always known, by a woman. I still see little kids in the Hasidic community going on the bus on Friday with colored pictures of the weekly portion of the Bible. Every week, Jews study a portion of the biblical story, and the children learn it through these pages. So they'll go on the bus with little colored pages from this book at the end of the week. So this book is extremely important to defining how the story of the Bible is understood in childhood. And that's why I think it's so important. It says here very strictly that you're not allowed to make any copies. And because of, I don't want to be in trouble with any copyright issues, so I put a big disclaimer here that you can't print anything, so it's just pure commentary, which falls within fair use of reviewing this text. The weekly portion of the Torah, Shemas, Exodus. So here we see the Pharaoh in the center. He saw that the Jewish children were repopulating, they were growing, so he thought that with his advisors for an idea how to stop that, how to lessen the growth of the Jewish people. And you can see here something that has always fascinated me with this series of books as an adult. It's something, of course, I didn't know as a child, is that it's incredibly historically anachronistic. It's like not based in any sense of what we know and imagine Pharaoh in Egypt looked like at the time. These are like generals of like, a lot of it seems to imagine Eastern European memory as the site of the biblical narrative. The Jews worked really hard to build, I think, the cities of Pithom and Almsai. So you can see the Jews were enslaved, and you can tell who's a Jew based on these visual cues, again, which indicates the author's imagining of Jews as looking as fairly recent Orthodox Jews by having sidecurls and beards and tzitzis, and you can tell those without beards to be the Egyptians. The Jews worked very hard to make cement, to chop down wood, and other very difficult work. So Jews are enslaved in Egypt by the Egyptian government, and they're being tortured. They also had to work very hard to sow fields, to dig, and to cut the harvest. Pharaoh told that all Jewish little boys that are born should be thrown into the water. The Jewish mothers left their little children in the field so that the Egyptians should not be able to throw their children into the water. And God made a miracle, and he gave them two stones, one made of milk and one of honey. So the story here is that miraculously the children survived by having stones that were essentially like breasts of milk and honey, and that sustained the babies that the mothers were saving from being thrown in the water. Major female figure of the Bible saw from a distance what happened to Moses, and they say Moshe, which is a term of endearment for Moses. And as she's watching, as Miriam is watching what's happening, she sees that Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses and takes Moses. So this is the story of Basia, which is not illustrated here. I'm surprised. Which also we learned a lot about. She saved Moses, who had been put in the water in a little basket, and she saved him and took him back to the royal palace. And I think maybe there is another book where that story is illustrated. Moses is already grown up. He grew up in the royal palace. And here he's going out and taking a walk around, and he's trying to see what's happening with his Jewish brothers. And he saw as one hits the other. So Moses said, "You evil person, why are you hitting your friend?" The Jews were pleading to God that he should already redeem them from their suffering in Egypt. And I think the theme that we see here that's really, I think, very powerful part of building of mythology and teaching children a sense of their identity and their own history, obviously is not rooted in a world history or in history of, let's say, of what we know of what the past has looked like and evolved into, but rather the history of Jewish people and wandering, persecution, suffering, and most of all, a desire for redemption and that kind of sense of otherness in a place that is not home. There's a foundational appreciation of Jews being diasporic, being enslaved, being a victim of nations who they are not equal citizens in, and are ultimately in tremendous suffering over it. Their lives are torturous and they are waiting for a redemption. And I think like that narrative is very important for little children to understand. This is what is today as well for these children. This is what's happened in Eastern Europe, a sense of waiting for a redemption, a sense of a connection to a long past of this being a part of the Jewish experience of being waiting to be returned to the homeland and be redeemed from suffering. So onward, we see the story that Moses is wandering and he saw a burning bush with fire that isn't burning. A dunboim is a thorn tree. So it's like a dry tree of thorns. How is it burning and not just like crumbling into ashes? So he was wondering why it's not getting burned. Moses threw his stick down in fear and it became a snake. So he got scared and he ran away. He was like, what's going on? So what happens here is really that he then realizes God has revealed itself to him. So one of the things that's interesting here is I just went to look if I'm missing any pages. I'm not. Is they're just giving us snippets. There's more to many of these stories. And these are just like pieces of each week's portion of the story of the book of Exodus. So here Moses and his brother Aaron are confronting Pharaoh. So essentially, I think what happened at the burning bush was God revealed himself to Moses, and Moses was sent as a messenger to plead with Pharaoh on behalf of the Jewish people that the Jewish people should not no longer be enslaved, or they should not be tortured. And of course, their baby sons were being thrown in the river and so on. And here we see them approach the Pharaoh. Aaron threw his stick to Pharaoh and became a snake. So in other words, to show that he was for real, he showed his power by doing this. And you can see the advisors are all very stunned. And again, like the traditional crown is very sweet for me to look back at it. This was always my idea of a king. You had this crown. That's what a king looked like. And the badinas, the soldiers at the side of the king, and the king had always a very regal chair with lions for power engraved in it. It's like an idea in the mind of what, like, just like people will have an idea of what Jesus looked like. This is my very much seared into my brain idea of a king and a royal palace of all eras in time. So what happened here that we start to see is that the Pharaoh is not listening to Aaron and Moses. And so God says, well, if you're not going to listen and let the Jewish people go and stop torturing them, I'm going to bring upon you a plague that will cause you to change your mind. And so we have the 10 plagues, which is essentially with each plague, there's an opportunity for redemption, for let the Jews go. And Pharaoh hardens his heart and does not allow the Jewish people to go. So we end up going through all the 10 plagues. So after the 10 plagues, God said that the Jews should broil the sacrifice for Passover in fire. And you can see here, it's like some lamb. And the blood of it should be put on the door. So God should know when he's punishing the people who have sinned, whose door to skip. And that's why the holiday Passover is called Passover, because the Jewish doors were passed over when God was punishing those who had been wicked. And you can see here, it's really fascinating. These men are all gathered around. This is presumably in Egypt, and they have strangles on. And their children have yarmulkes on. And it's like they have the belts, they have the full garb. And it creates a very strong sense that a Jew is recognizable with these specific accessories. And it explains why Hasidic kids might, for instance, look at someone like me and say, a goy, not a Jew. There's an assumption that there's a visual identifier for a Jewish person that is created in these childhood visual narratives. These kids are not watching movies, they're not seeing television, they're not seeing a lot of visual representations, except this book is a very important one. Although nowadays there are a lot of other books, and hopefully I can get to them. There are comic books. There's like crazy stuff going on. I actually just bought a few books. This is a Yiddish recipe book that was actually very expensive. It was $30. That is like a new age in children's books, but this book continues, I think, to be very formative, important lesson, and perhaps less so than it was for my day. It would be an interesting subject to find that out. So here, the Jews ate the sacrifice for Passover with matzah, which is the bread, and myrrh. They put on their shoes with their sticks in their hand. They were ready to leave Egypt, meaning God said, I am going to finally save you. And the Jews said, we trust in you. We have faith in this. We are ready. And so the final plague came along where God punished those who had been evil and had tortured and killed their firstborn sons. And at this point, Pharaoh had had enough and came running in the streets, and he's running in the middle of the night to Moses and Aaron, and the children laughed at him, and someone said, he is here, and someone else said, he is here. And this is the scene that's famously the Pharaoh in pajamas scene, because notoriously he was running in his pajamas in the streets. And there are actually people who on the holiday Purim I have seen dressed up as Pharaoh in pajamas. It's like a well-known joke. He was like, finally, okay, he's not allowed the Jews to go under, despite so many bad things happening. He's finally said, that's it. And he's running in the middle of the night with pajamas. And that's like a big source of like humor somehow. Although if you ask me, this is a very nice dress. It's not, I'd go out with it. I'd go shopping. I'd go to a wedding with it. Pharaoh begged Moses and Aaron, he should leave already with all the Jews because he was afraid that he will also die. But Moses said, no, we are only waiting for the commandment from God. In other words, it's a lesson of we're not taking orders from earthly kings, we're taking orders from heavenly kings. It's about faith. In the middle of the day of the very strong Egyptian sun, the Jews left Egypt, and Pharaoh yelled after them, go faster, go faster. But as soon as Pharaoh saw that 3 days have passed and the Jews are not returning, he immediately got on his horse and he took along all his advisors from Egypt, and he started to chase the Jews. The Jews reached the sea, and the Egyptians reached them there. And they started to attack them with bows and arrows, and spears. But God made a miracle, and a cloud surrounded the Jews. The Jews walked through the sea to the other side. So this was a very big miracle, the parting of the sea, which is a very central moment. And there was like a protection from both sides. There's also a story here of like someone named Nachshon ben Aminudav who jumped in, and like it was about faith that the sea was going to split. The sea did indeed split and no one drowned. However, when the Egyptians went in, this happened. When the Egyptians chased after the Jews to the other side, God told the water to return to normal, thaw, and all the Egyptians drowned. When the Jews came out from the water, they sang to God, and Miriam and the women sang with drums. And this is a lesson, women of the commandment of kol isha, which is that the woman's voice is something that needs to be kept private. Women can sing with each other, but not in front of men. And so in this moment, they're not singing, they are singing with drums. We always understood it that they're using instruments to create music instead of their voices. So now we start to see the wandering of the desert phase, where there's, again, story of miracle, God's intervention, divine intervention, and faith. Here they're wandering in the deserts, they're living in tents. It's just so interesting. You know, you hear a story like this and you give it to someone who has no visual frame of reference and you say, show us what a desert life wandering for 40 years would look like. And this is what she conjured up. It's a bunch of tents. It's people who she imagined look like in the past, which doesn't look very far back. And they have bell jars and full tools. And sometimes the insides of their houses look very, very civilized. This is the text. Every morning, manna fell for the Jews in the desert, and everyone took a little bit. There was like an allocation of only X amount for every person. So there is almost like a kind of like social equity, like allocation, almost like a socialism around the manna. You're only allowed to take as much as you're imagined to need. These are Dus Nanavidim didn't listen, and they took more than you were allowed. They were the capitalists. Sorry, I'm looking back with adult eyes, and this is what's coming to my mind. But really, the lesson is about not being greedy. And what's really funny about them is that they look like more modern Hasidim. Their hats are smaller. Their side curls have been like tucked up. Their beards have been trimmed. They're still Hasidic, but they're modern because they're obviously not listening to the rules. So there's like a visual representation to go along with these characters to show that they are not like fully in the system. But when Dus Nanavidim got home with like their loot, they saw that it shrunk back to only the amount you were allowed to take. And again, you can see the inside of their tent is really nice. I wonder what the rent is. You weren't allowed to leave manna from one day to the next. You're supposed to eat your ration and not take more. And these two men did do it, and they left it over for 2 days, and it became rotten, and they were full of worms. And they were really, it's a really funny scene here. But again, it's the lesson of take only what you need. Don't be greedy. Don't take from others, and listen to what's, like follow the social contract. Friday, the leaders came to Moses and they said, why did we get 2 rations today? Why did 2 rations fall from heaven? So Moses said, because on Saturday you must rest and you're not allowed to collect manna on Saturday. So you're getting your ration for Saturday. And this is a kind of like a lesson that you cook everything for Saturday. On Friday, you prepare all the food for Saturday on Friday. So we see a preview of how the Sabbath is observed, how Shabbos is observed, in how the manna was prepared on Friday. Dus Nanavidim wanted to prove that manna did fall from heaven on Shabbos. And here you can see that it's Shabbos and they're wearing shtreimels because that's a hat that married men wear only on Shabbos. So they spread out their manna and a miracle happened and the birds came and ate it up. So their ploy could not work out. Jethro and Zipporah with her children came to the desert, and Moses and Aaron went to welcome them. So Jethro is Moses' father-in-law, and Zipporah is his wife, and I guess presumably those are his children. In honor of his visit, a big meal was prepared, and Moshe Rabbeinu, the saintly Moses, gave food to everyone. So it's really interesting because this is very reminiscent of a Hasidic court and how a rabbi will welcome guests. He might have more modern guests. I'm assuming this is Jethro, who looks more modern, and the followers would gather around as they have conversation at a head of a table, and food will be distributed to all of the guests. So this is like a very Hasidic scene that's being imagined, sort of fitted onto the story of the Bible, and showing how this particular meal went down. The act of giving food is especially associated with a Hasidic Rebbe, with a Hasidic leader, where that act in itself kind of is like getting the food to be sanctified from the rabbi and then passed on to the followers is some kind of kinship, but also some elevation. It's like a distinctly Hasidic thing. And here's a very important moment in Mount Sinai. All the Jews were present when the Torah was given to the Jews on Mount Sinai, and Mount Sinai was in flames. It was full of lightnings and thunders, and the sound of a shofar was very loud. Moses studied the laws of Judaism with the Jews. And here we see one very lovely one. If you see a Jew going with a heavy bag, then you have to help them. And you can see they have illustrated both male and female. Something I do love about this illustrator, among everything, I really love this illustration. I think it's fascinating and I think it's made with a lot of heart. But something I really like is she always, even though she's like really old school, she always illustrated women, always. And now these are parts of the temple and the Aron. This is a menorah, and you can see it has only 3 arms instead of 4, which is what you have on Hanukkah. These are different parts. And the oil from the menorah had to be made from olives that grew at the tip of the tree. This is the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, the Kohen, the priest of the temple. He had like an apron. This is called a choshen. It had all sorts of gems and stones, and a hat, and a belt. I don't know if this is accurate at all. This is how I always think the priest looked like, because this is how it was illustrated in my childhood. But I think the expression shmoyne begudim, which means 8 clothing, which is like when someone is fully dressed up, like they're putting on everything. You say, "Oh, you're in the shmoyne begudim. Oh, you're wearing the 8 clothing." It's not literally 8. It's a figure of speech to say you've really gotten fully dressed. It comes from the 8 clothing of the priest. If I am wrong, please tear me down, and I will not take it personally. I will take a lesson from it. This is, I believe, the pants. And now about how the Jews were counted by bringing a half a shekel. And in little words, it's always the Hebrew verse from the Bible that this illustrator used to create these scenes is always in small text on the bottom. And she asks in the beginning, if you're going to make copies for your students of my text, please remove the text because it's holy and you don't want it to end up in the trash. Parshat Vayikra Shabbos, on the holy day of Shabbos, you're not allowed to put on a fire or a light or even a gas wrench. And you can see here, they're sitting at the Shabbos table, and mom and dad are saying, this is not allowed. You're not allowed to turn on a light. You're not allowed to turn on the stove, which is probably a good idea not to do all week if you're that young. But the idea is no one is allowed to turn on or off lights or electricity. You're allowed to turn on in fans, but not on Shabbos. And we discussed this on my channel extensively, that a Gentile in time of need is allowed to do it. So like if this little kid mistakenly turned off the light, you can ask or you can hint a Gentile to do it for you, and then you kind of reward them with like some food or something. It's called a Shabskoi. The Jews built their donations to Moses so he could build the Mishkan. God told to Moses to throw the gold in the fire, and a menorah came out of it. And that is that went by really fast. You can see here in the back all of these other books. This is in the center. We see 2 men shaking hands. It's the Holy Days. Different books. Pretty much all of the 5 books of the Bible, of the Torah, are illustrated. I think there are many others in the book of Esther, from Megillus Esther as well. I did show a little bit when I did a video about Shabbos. I showed a little bit of one of the children's books from this series about how Shabbos is understood, the Jewish day of rest. Also Hanukkah, how Hanukkah is understood, the holiday of Hanukkah. I think it's a very, very specific way of understanding the Bible, probably very different from how many other people would understand these texts, and reflect a very internal value system. It's very strong, very, very community oriented. It's very much about obedience, about listening, about doing the right thing, not being greedy, and following the right path, and so on. It's really, really interesting. If you like this kind of thing, I have so many things. I would love to do more of it, so please let me know. Trying to do a fair kind of sociological review. The children's books from this series really interested me. I think one of the negative side effects of this series is it hinders an understanding of the world in the way that it is understood nowadays by pretty much everyone, which is an evolution of development from a more primitive way of living to a more civilized urban, and like you go from agriculture to the Industrial Revolution. There's like a thrust in history that is missing from these texts. Some of the books will have as early as the time of creation, someone has a phone. So it's really an anachronistic, meaning it's really historically inaccurate. And when you have that kind of lack of historical full narrative as the world is understood today, with this kind of thrust towards progression, I think it really, really has a very profound effect on the psyche. It also has a very profound effect on a sense of identity. Who's a Jew? Who's not a Jew? Which is defined with such a long visual history of what it means to be a Jew. And I think most people grow up and start to realize it's more complicated, and there are other ways that they start to learn a more complicated narrative. But this in particular book is a very profound effect in introducing this more limited set of values. Thank you so much for watching and for all of your kindness and your thoughts and correcting me and making notes and teaching me stuff. I really love that. I'm going to go back now and I'm going to reread it in Yiddish for those that are interested. For those that are not, thanks for being here. Bye-bye. Paro hat gesehen, als jüdische Kinder meinen sich sehr viel, hat getracht mit seinem gekommen, mal eize, wie soll sie vermindern. Die Jiden haben sich sehr schwer gepluckt, aufzubauen Pissem in Ramses. Die Jiden haben sehr schwere Arbeit, sie machen Leim in Sigel, hacken Holz in noch schwere Arbeit. Auch haben die Jiden schwere Arbeit, sie an seinen Feldern, ackern in Schnaden Twier. Paroi befeuern, als alle jüdische Jüngler aus werden geboren, soll man heranwerfen im Wasser. Die jüdischen Mamas haben übergelassen seine Kinder in die Felder, gedei die Mitzrayim sollen seine heranwerfen im Wasser. In Hashem's Buch hat Vasai von 2 Steiner gegeben Milch in Honig. Miriam hat der Wartens gekickt, was ist geschehen mit Moschele, ist gekommen Parois Tochter, und hat ihn getroffen, und sie hat ihn ziehen genommen. Moshe Rabbeini ist heraus, sehen, was tut sich mit seinen Brüdern, hat gesehen, wie einer schluckt dem Zweiten. Hat Moshe gesagt, Rusche, was schluckst du dann, Chaber? Die Jiden haben geschrien und gebeten, Hashem's Buch, es soll schon auslassen vom Mitzrayim. Moshe Rabbeini hat gesehen, ein Dornbaum brennt Feuer und es wird nicht verbrennt. Hat ihm gewundert, von was wird es nicht verbrennt? Wenn Moshe Rabbeini hat herabgeworfen dem Stecken, ist es geworden eine Schlange, und hat sich erschrocken und ist weggelaufen. Aaron hat geworfen der Stecken von Paroi, und es ist geworden eine Schlange. Alle Wasser von Mitzrayim ist geworden Blit, und die Mitzrayim haben nicht gehabt, was zu trinken, aber für jeden ist gewesen Gitterwasser. Auch wenn jeder gebeten hat am Mitzri Wasser, ist es gleich geworden Blit. Nur wenn der Mitzri aber zahlt Geld, ist es geblieben Wasser. Die Fische von Tag sind ausgestorben, und es hat seine schlechte Geruch. Wenn Tag ist rausgekommen, ein größer Frosch, und wenn mehr Beziehungen uns geschlagen, als mehr Fröschen sind rausgekommen. Die Frösche sind gekrochen in die Schlafzimmer in alle Betten. Der Beschäfer hat geheißen, man soll brüten dem Korbenpeisach mit in Feuer, und soll legen der Blit auf die zweite Saat in Oven von Tier. Die Jiden haben gegessen dem Korbenpeisach für Matzes im Mutter, durch Schichtchen umgetan, mit den Steckens in Hand, gleich rausgegeben für Mitzrayim. Pink, mitten in der Nacht, ist bei einer größeren Geschrei Mitzrayim, wo es noch sonst keinem nicht gewesen, weil alle Bechorim sind gestorben. Paro ist rausgelaufen, mitten in der Nacht, sich Moshe in den Haaren, und die Kinder haben gelacht von ihm. Einer hat gesagt, er ist du, und einer hat gesagt, er ist dort. Paro hat sich gebeten von Moshe in den Haaren, sie sollen schon rausgehen mit alle Jiden, weil Mutter gehabt, als wird auch sterben. Aber Moshe war nicht geantwortet, nein, man wartet auf den Befehl von dem Eibischen. Im mitten hellen Tag sind die Jiden rausgegangen vom Mitzrayim, und Paro hat geschrien, geht schneller, geht schneller. Also wie Paro hat gesehen, es ist schon durch 3 Tage, und die Jiden kommen nicht zurück, hat er schnell allein eingespannt am Pferd, und mitgenommen alle Radwege, wegen für Mitzrayim durchzulaufen die Jiden. Die Mitzrayim haben die gerechte Jiden beim Yam, und sie haben geschossen, fallen und Spießen auf sie, aber der Wolken hat alles herangenommen in sich. Die Jiden sind durchgegangen in den Yam, auf Technisch, in das Wasser für Yam, ist gewesen, sie sah wie ein Mauer auf beide Seiten. Wenn die Mitzrayim sind durchgelaufen, die Jiden in die Technisch für Yam, hat Hashem's Buch geheißen, die Wasser sollen zurück auflassen, und alle Mitzrayim sind getrunken geworden. Wenn die Jiden sind herausgekommen von zweiten Saat, von zwischen den Wasser, wenn die Mitzrayim sind herausgekommen von zwischen den Wassern, haben sie gesucht, Schieder zu Hashem's Buch, in Miriam mit den Frauen haben gesungen mit Poken. Jeden in der Früh ist gefallen man von den Jiden in der Mitte. Jeder hat gemäht Kloben, nur ein Eimer für ein Mensch. Dussen in Aviram haben nicht gefolgt, sie haben geklebt mehr, von wie viel man mäht. Wenn Dussen Wenn Dusen in Avidem sind nach Hause gekommen, haben sie gesehen, als es sei übergeblieben nur ein Eimer. Man hat nicht gezut überlassen, man für einen auf den zweiten. Dusen in Avidem haben ja übergelassen, und es ist auf den zweiten Tag geworden, verdorben im Vermeg. Fertig sind in Sim gekommen, fragen Moshe Rabbeinu, von was ist es gefallen, für jedem zweiten 2 Eimer. Moshe sei geämpft, weil Shabbos wird nicht fallen kann man. Dusen in Avidem haben gewollt zeigen, als es ja gefallen man im Shabbos, haben sie das ausgespreit. Sie haben gekommen, die feigelig, und es aufgegessen. Israel Zipporah mit ihren Kindern sind umgekommen im Midbar, und Moshe und Aaron mit allen Jiden sind entgegengegangen. Covid Israel hat man umgegreift, als Sida und Moshe Rabbeinu geteilt das Essen. Alle Jiden sind gewesen beim geben der heilige Teure. Der Berg Sinai hat geflackert, also gedinnet und geblitzt, und man geht a Kohlschritte sei ruhig. Moshe Rabbeinu hat gelernt Haluchas mit den Jiden. Also wenn seht, ein Jid geht in das schwere Päckl, müssen wir ihm zu helfen. Here it says, du musst beiche Eule, du musst beiche Keteures. Die Öl von der Menorah hat man gedacht machen für Arbeiten, was wachsen auf der Spitzbäume. Die Jiden bringen halbe Schulen. Shabbos Kodesh tun wir nicht uns in einer Feier oder einer Lektor oder einer Gäsranch. Die Jiden haben gebringt von Moshe Rabbeinu in der Duvas, sie bauen in Mischken. Bei Schäfer hat gesagt von Moshe Rabbeinu, soll anwerfen, something gold, I can't see because of the page, in Feier, und von dem ist rausgekommen mit der Menorah. Parshas Pekidai, and that's the end. That's it for today. Ashkoyach. Van Yiddish hat geblieben van Yiddish heilig. My Yiddish is a little real rusty. I'm not the best reader. Thank you for being with me here today. Please make sure to leave a comment. Just share your thoughts. I really look forward to that. Bye now.